So now that we have the dependency that we need, that's going to bring in the Java JWT library that we need to generate the token. Let's go ahead and work on the actual provider now. So the provider is going to be what's going to be used to generate the token and do all the work relating to the token. So let me go here, and I'm just going to create a new package. I'm just going to call it utility. You can call this whatever makes sense to you. I'm just going to call it utility. And then utility, I'm going to create a new class, and that class is going to be the JWT token provider. So let's do token provider. You can call this whatever you want, JWT utility, or whatever makes sense to you. Provider. So JWT provider, token provider. Okay. So now what I want first is I want to bring in the secret. So the secret is going to be a string. It's going to be something very random, and that's what the algorithm is going to use to encode your actual token. So, and decode it or decipher or whatever it does. So let's do private. That's going to be a string, and let's say that's the secret. Okay. So this is the secret. Usually you would have this in some secure server, and then you would have it probably in your property file, like whatever property file you're using for the application, and then you would get that information anytime you need it from that secure server. So that's definitely something you want to keep secure, because if it's compromised, then your entire system is compromised, because then you know, all the token can be decoded, and they can see everything, all the information in the token in plain text. So you really want to keep this secret very secure and somewhere nobody can access it. So I'm gonna set this up in the actual property of the application. The reason that happens is because you can have like a property file for the application or configuration file for the application outside of the application bundle. So what I mean by that is you will build an application, right? And then you will bundle the application, meaning whenever you want to deploy, you're going to, for instance, this is going to be deployed as a jar. So you can take that jar and put it in a folder, and then inside that folder, you can have other configuration files, and depending on where you're deploying, you can deploy a specific configuration file. For instance, if I'm testing, I can have a configuration file for testing, and that configuration file can contain, you know, some dummy server or some dummy database or something like that. So once you have that information in a secure way, then, you know, it's harder for someone to access it, because they need to be authenticated sometimes to access the actual server, the secure server, and that's holding all the secret or in the very secure parameters that's used for maybe database connection and all that stuff. So that's why I'm showing you that best practice is to usually have this in a secure server somewhere, and then anytime you can have a configuration file that can access it anytime the application needs it. But here, you know, we're not really doing that. So that's going to come from the actual YAML file. So I'm just going to put the value annotation on this so that we can just grab that. And then I have to specify the name of the property in the properties file. So that's going to be JWT.secret. Okay. So now we can have this name in the actual property file. So let's go back to the YAML file, which is our current property file, and then we can have JWT, and then underneath we can have secret, and I'm just gonna paste a random string. So this is something that you have to make very hard for someone to be able to guess, because it's supposed to be you know, some random string of characters that's really hard for someone to just guess if they're trying to break into your system. So you can put whatever you want. I would highly encourage you to for this to be something very secure. Like, it can't be like, you know, something like password or some word or something like that, because someone might have a system that can use some brute force attack, and then they just keep trying like actual word, and then they can break into your system or break your your security. Okay, so that's just some random string that I just been using any time that I'm doing this. You can change it, it doesn't really matter. And I'm gonna show you why this is important, because we're gonna use it to verify our token once we create it. So this is gonna be our secret and the YAML file, and then the provider, we're just gonna access it that way. We just put the value and then put the name of it, so Spring will do its thing and then go into the properties file and look for that and then pass it in here for the variable name. So the first method that we're gonna need is going to be the method to generate the token. So let's do public, and the token is a string, so that's gonna return a string, and let's call it generate JWT token. You can give it any name that makes sense to you. And this is gonna take a user principal, because whenever they log in, I'm gonna take their information, make sure they exist in my database, and then once I know their credential is good, then I can create a a user principal from Spring, which we created earlier. So we're gonna do user principal, and that's gonna be our user principal. So then what we want to do is we want to actually get all the claims for that user. So the user is going to come into our application. They give us a username and password. We say, hey, okay, this person is actually in our application. We recognize this user. Their password is correct. So once we know that information, we'll go ahead and take that information and create a user principal. This user principal is the user that is relating to Spring, right? So we'll take that user principal and then get all the claims for that user, meaning all the authorities or all the permissions. Okay, so let's create an array of string, and we're just gonna call this, let's call them claims, and that's gonna be, I'm just gonna create another method to get that. So get claims from user, okay, because that's what this is doing, and I can just pass the user the user principal, okay. And here I get this method. So now what I want to do is I want to go ahead and generate the token. So now I have the claims for that user that has successfully authenticated, because at this point they're past the authentication. They've been authenticated. I can say, hey, this person, they provide me good credentials. So now I just need to generate the actual token. So let's just return JWT. As you can see, we have the library coming into play. So JWT, and we need to create a JSON Web Token. So that's what this is going to be. So JSON Web Token that create. This is coming from the library. If you had a chance to go through the GitHub page, you would be able to see how to create that token. So what we have to do now, we have to pass in a bunch of information. So now we can do with issuer, and that's gonna be the issuer of the token, and of course that can be your company name or whatever the case might be. So I'm gonna do get underscore arrays. Well, I have to call in the constant first, so let's do security get array. So I pass in the issuer, which is the name of your application. So, and then I can pass in the audience. So with audience, and then here again I can call the security constant, and I'm just gonna call the audience that I defined, which is the administration. And then after that, I can also specify when this token was issued, which is very important because it's gonna look at that to determine if the token is expired or not. And then I can just say new date, which is from JWT. So right now, like whenever this this token is being created, that's exactly when it's issued. And then you can change that date depending on your logic. Doesn't necessarily have to be now, but in most cases it's gonna be now. Next, we have to specify the subject, so we can do with subject, and that's going to be the actual user That can be the username or some user ID or something like that. In our case, it's probably not going to be the name. It's going to be like some unique identifier that can identify the user in your database. So that's why it's usually not the actual name of the user, because you don't really care about the name of the user in this specific situation. So here we can get the principal that we brought in, and then we can just get the username from the principal. Okay, so we're gonna say the subject or the owner or the user for that token will be whoever that person is with their username. And then after that, we can pass in all the actual claims that we got for this specific user, because we passed them in this method that I still have to finish, and we get all the claims. So with those claims, we can pass them here. We can say, hey, this is the username, and that username has all those claims. So we can do with array claim, do with array claim, and then here I can pass in the name of the claim and the actual claim. So remember, we define secured constant that's gonna be authorities, and we just have to pass in the actual authorities, which is claim. So let me put this on a new line. All right, so what we're defining is we're saying we're gonna create a JSON Web Token with this issuer, which is our company name, for this audience, which is the administration people. For you can think of whatever you want, but that's going to be for this specific example, our administration, when it's issued, which is now, create a new date object, and then the subject is going to be the username of the user, and then the claims, which is the authorities, that's going to be the claims that I got for that user here with their information, because this will contain the claim of the user. I just have to do some, a little bit of coding and then get this claims and then pass them here. And then now what I have to pass in now is the expiration date. So I can do with expiration at, and then I can pass the new date, right? So I'll pass right now, and then I can pass in 5 days, which is coming from the security constant expiration time. Okay, so now that I have that, the only thing that I have to do now is to sign it. So I can go on a new line, and I'm gonna do sign, and I have to specify the algorithm. So that's gonna be, let's do 512. You can look at those algorithm. It's just the degree of the encryption and all that stuff, and you just can use whatever you want. I would definitely encourage you to use the most secure one or the latest one with the least vulnerability. And then in here we have to pass the bytes of the secret. So we can just call our secret. So secret that, and we have to get all the bytes from that. So that's how we're gonna generate the token. Gonna see if I can do some import on those. So we have this constant. We can go here and then just do dot and call on everything, and then we have to make this a static import static, and then we can just remove those like this. I know there is a shortcut to do this. I haven't memorized all the shortcut yet, so bear with me 1 second. And more action, import static. Okay, so here's the method that's gonna generate the actual token. So it's gonna go from getting the user principal after they've been authenticated. So after I verify their username and password, and then I get all their claims, and then with that claims I generate the token by passing in the issuer, which is your company name, and the audience. So what audience is it for? Is it going to be for user in finance or user in administration? Here we just define administration. We set the date it was issued at. So with issued at, we take today's date, or exactly now, whenever this is being issued. We pass in the subject, which is in this case going to be the username. Again, this has to be a unique identifier for the user. It has to be unique. So that's why you can't use something like their name or their email or something like that. And then you pass in the actual authorities or permissions for that specific user. So all of this is going to be part of the token. So we name them, specify when this is going to expire. So we're not going to do new date. We're going to do new date. And then we're going to pass in the current time of the system. system dot current times in millisecond. Okay, so we take the current time in millisecond and then we add more to it. So that's what we're doing here. So this will be the method that's going to be responsible to generate the token with the user information and their claims, which is their permissions. You don't necessarily have to call this claim. You can call it whatever you want. You know, something like permissions or authorities. We define a name for it. So in an array, in the array, they're going to be named authorities. So it's going to be authorities. They're going to equal to a string of all the permission. And then we pass in the expression time. So we take the current time on the system and then we add 5 days to it. If you remember, in millisecond we put 5 days and then we sign it with the ECMAC 512 algorithm, and then we pass in our secret.